What is up, everybody? Welcome into Shout, a Buffalo football podcast. Thank you so much for your patience. I had to go and meet my family for dinner. My wife is taking my son to with the grandparents to the Sabres game tonight. So had to grab my daughter, get her all set up upstairs. So we're rocked. We're set in. We're ready. We're ready to rock and roll right here on Shout. Big day down at One Bills Drive today. We heard from Jim Leonhard, the new defensive coordinator, Pete Carmichael, the new offensive coordinator, head coach Joe Brady, for what seems like his 60th interview. And I brought it up when he was coming to the podium, and we'll have some fun with that. I want to get into some of what we heard today, Ryan, and what we think it could mean for a couple of players as we start to begin conversations about this roster build, where it's at, and what kind of construction expectations we have for this offseason based on the first remarks we heard from Leonhard and Carmichael today. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing great. Yeah, it was great to hear from the coordinators, hear again from Brady. It's something that we're not necessarily used to, but obviously the Bills haven't made many coaching moves of this nature since you and I have been on the beat together. Great, though, to hear their viewpoints and early thoughts on this roster and maybe what this team will look like in 2026.
I want to have a mini conversation on Taran Johnson here in a minute. So definitely stay tuned for that. I think fans are going to enjoy this exercise and kind of thinking about what the potential is for him long-term in this defense under Leonhard, and what are some of the options at the Bills that the Bills have this off season with Johnson going into the last year or this year of his contract. There's a lot of, when you're thinking about Taran Johnson and what the Bills can do or will do with him, there's a lot of factors and variables that go into this that I think are going to be interesting. But before we get there, let's do some big picture takeaways from today. And I wanted to say, I was pretty hard on the Pete Carmichael hiring. You were very high on it, kind of pushed back a little bit. Getting a chance to sit in front of him today, hearing him talk about his vision and over the last couple of days, really listening to some of the people that know him best, I've come around on this hire a lot more. And something Joe Brady even said today about Carmichael, it's like, don't get it twisted. He prepares every week as if he were to be the play caller on Sundays, because there's a lot of things going into the game, ideas, on the fly. Joe Brady's handling game management stuff, and maybe Carmichael's got to shoot in a couple of different ideas on plays, and they got to be really synchronized in a way that I didn't really think about before. He is a bright dude, and everybody that's been around him, I think that's the big piece. I was listening to Benjamin Albright. He went on with Greg Tomset after the hiring was announced. Those guys at Cover One do a great job. They did their also wanted to shout out Greg Tomset. Great roundtable with Chris Trapasso and those guys on the salary cap. That's a must listen to every year. I highly recommend everybody get over there. I'm working on Trapasso for next week, so we'll get him into the mix here again as well. But I to me, that was just the big thing for me was Carmichael, to me, is this settling presence on a coaching staff that is going to feature, albeit a really up-and-coming offensive mind in Joe Brady, somebody that's doing it for the first time.
Right. He's going to be the soundboard for Joe Brady, I guess is how I would put it, where Brady obviously has this offense, has a lot of ideas that have worked. The Bills' offense has been top 10 his 2 seasons as the permanent OC. But now as a head coach, you know, one, you're wearing so many other different hats, but two, when you are game planning for specific teams, you're going to want to go to someone like Pete Carmichael and ask his thoughts and bounce ideas off of one another. And, you know, Carmichael, 20 plus years experience in this league. I know he hasn't called plays in many of them being under Sean Payton, but there's been a few experiences and he's fared fairly well, in my opinion, in that regard. And there's little things that I think he's going to do for this offense and unlocking this offense, Matt. And it's in our headline. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but I think this is going to be a huge thing for James Cook, having Pete Carmichael here. And we can get to that in a minute. I see we have a super chat.
Yeah, let's get to the super chat here. Shout out to our guy, Mark Bouchard, chiming in with the super chat. Who do you believe will be candidates for contract extensions, and who might be candidates to be possibly released? I mean, for me, at the top of the list for releases is Curtis Samuel, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that you stand to make the most money back in terms of what you can add in salary cap space. Who do you got as like a contract extension candidate? Because it's funny, I was arguing a couple weeks ago about a potential Deion Dawkins trade idea. And you could also live in a world where you extend him this offseason and create some cap space that way. So what do you think about that?
Right. I think Dawkins is on that list. And for anyone that didn't catch it yet, Deion Dawkins did an interview with One Bills Live. I think he realizes that at this point in his career, there needs to be some changes to his game. And he said he's going to come in maybe lighter than he's ever been this summer to training camp. He wants to be around 320, he said. So he wants to kind of reshape himself. And I think he's focused on making that next step in terms of this veteran player and what he can do. And for the Bills, he's been this protector of Josh Allen his entire career. He's done such a great job, a Pro Bowl guy, all pro type caliber player. So I think he makes the most sense for an extension. There's another guy that's really interesting because of his contract, where I could live in a world where I could see the Bills moving on from Dawson Knox because of the salary that he has lined up this year, and maybe cutting him and telling him to test the market, and maybe they'll try to match whatever the best offer is out there because he's just making way too much. But you could also rework his deal via extension. So there's guys that you can, work with their contracts or rework their contracts by extending them.
Yeah, for me, the Dawson Knox restructuring is one that I'm really interested in how the Bills can make that potentially work. And Mark brings up in his second super chat here, he meant a contract restructuring. And I think the Dawson Knox model is probably one where you get him to the table and see if he wants to take a pay reduction. I mean, that $17.8 million cap hit in 2026 is absolutely untenable. And because he's, to your earlier point, because he's so close with Josh Allen, I think you can make a case to him to release him with the idea of wanting to get him back. That's the kind of player that I think will be willing to play ball a little bit in that way and see what's out there. Let's get you back on a more competitive deal, because at this point, he just hasn't played to that number over the last couple of seasons. Even when he's been given opportunities with an injured Dalton Kincaid, I don't think the production has been there to match that number.
Yeah, I agree with that. And obviously Knox will have to consider his family and things like that, but he's made good money in this league. And I don't see anyone coming close to what he's currently making. But if he were to be let go, what other teams are offering, I think maybe it would be more digestible to what the Bills would offer. And as much as I love, Kincaid's ceiling in this offense, he has struggled to stay healthy. We learned that no surgery on the horizon again for that PCL injury. Jackson Hawes had a really good rookie season, but is he really ready to ascend to that number 2 role? There's a lot of questions there, and Knox is so good as a blocker, a receiver, doing a little bit of everything, where I could see a world where he's definitely back at a much lower number.
All right, if you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button. Hit the subscribe button as well. We're cooking here. Over 15K subscribers, on the way to 20K in 2026 here. So that's the big push. Let's get to what I think Pete Carmichael will mean for James Cook. And in the headline, I said, unlock James Cook. And how much can you unlock a player that is the reigning rushing champion? And so that piece of it, I'm not sitting back here and saying that there's some great other level of James Cook that needs to be unlocked. What I mean by that is his role in the offense. And we've been waiting, I think, since early on in his career to see that dual threat nature come to light. Now, it's very important to mention there were some drop issues early on in his career. And I think that that's what made the Bills pivot, on top of how good Ty Johnson has been as that pass catching back in this stable. But I mean, Alvin Kamara was the do everything back in New Orleans. And now with Carmichael here, it's interesting hearing Joe Brady talk about it. It's like what coaches have seen at other stops, they're going to be able to implement or bring to this room what they've already built, what they've already collaborated on, and maybe touch on something that, James Cook maybe wasn't ever thinking about his role or how to do something in particular a certain way that could, just having that voice in the room, unlock something. So I think that's a really big piece to the Carmichael hire that I'm really excited about.
Yeah, when James Cook was drafted by the Bills, it's funny. He was viewed by many as not being a number one back, but being a pass catching threat, a weapon for this offense. And obviously, as the years have gone on, James Cook has turned into a number one running back in this league, leading the league in rushing yards. But he's never taken off as that receiver that maybe you thought you would get out of him when he first came from Georgia, part of that system there. You know, you look at Alvin Kamara's numbers in New Orleans, and first 3 seasons in the league, 81 receptions, 90 or 100 plus targets. I certainly don't necessarily believe that you're going to see him all of a sudden like get 100 plus targets, but I think you're going to see a major uptick in his usage as a receiver. And I think that can unlock something else for this offense where teams are going to have to play them a little bit differently if you know that James Cook is more of a threat to get the ball as a receiver. And we know that their emphasis this offseason is going to be upgrading their wide receiver room. So you already have a dynamic and special player. I mean, Pete Carmichael pretty much said one of his jobs is just not to screw up James Cook with where he currently is as a player. But I do think that, like I said earlier, bouncing ideas off of Joe Brady, talking a little bit about what worked with Alvin Kamara, utilizing that and getting him more involved as a receiving threat is going to be on the horizon for the Bills this offseason.
I'm glad that you bring up bouncing ideas off of each other, because I think that was kind of the cool thing about today is hearing about the way they're going about the process. Jim Leonhard, he shows up yesterday. Brandon Bean revealed this morning on Jeremy White and Joe DiBiase's show over on WGR that Jim Leonhard stood in front of all of the scouts who are assembled in Orchard Park right now to talk about his vision for the defense. They went through the roster as is, and then maybe like what he's looking for as they start to put together their draft boards over the last couple of weeks. That's one piece of this, Ryan, that's maybe not talked about enough, is how much that all of these scouts that have been spending the last 4 to 6 months on the scouting trail for all of these colleges and all of these prospects with a vision for the kind of players that fit into a Sean McDermott coach team, specifically on defense. So now all of that's going to change as you move into this new regime. And so that's going to be a piece of this that's really interesting. And I think the bouncing off of ideas is it's something that we can all kind of relate to when we're sitting around the kitchen table, bouncing around ideas. What are we going to have for dinner, right? Well, just get over to Top Friendly Markets. They got ready to serve fan favorites at your fingertips, especially this playoff season. The big game coming up this weekend. Get yourself hooked up. Let Tops do the cooking, and you'll be the real MVP. Visit takeoutmeals.topsmarkets.com and elevate your food game with a great selection of custom cakes, desserts, pizzas, sandwiches, fresh fruit, cheese trays, fried chicken. They got everything. Of course, the famous breakfast pizza. Save time and easily shop with the convenience of no-fee pickup on all game day deals.
You know, one more thing on the bouncing off ideas. Obviously, the scouts are going to have a huge say in what the Bills do and who they draft. But another reason I love this defense as it's being molded, you have Jim Leonhard that is not that far removed from being in the college ranks as an advisor and a defensive coordinator. You bring in Jay Valai from Oklahoma, who is going to know some prospects there and some players that obviously he saw out there in Oklahoma the last few seasons that might be good fits for this scheme. Bobby April III coming from Stanford. So I love the way that they're mixing up some of this coaching talent that's coming from the college ranks, bringing in some established guys from the league. And you know, same thing on the offensive side of the ball. There's going to be some new voices on the offensive room, but they're also retaining a lot of guys on this coaching staff too. So it's going to be a really good mix on the coaching staff. But yeah, to see how these scouts pivot in terms of the defensive side of the ball is going to be the most interesting thing to me leading up to the draft.
Let's get on to Taran Johnson here, because I want to get into what Jim Leonhard said about him today and kind of what the options are for him as the Bills envision his future in Buffalo, because there's so many layers to this. You have what I think is fair to say a declining player, right? But a player that brings juice, leadership, all of the stuff, the intangibles that you talk about for years as a leader in Sean McDermott's defense, something that I think a Jim Leonhard would want to tap into. And you start to think about what are the different ways that you can maybe utilize a Taran Johnson in Jim Leonhard's defense. That's going to be something we spend the next couple of months trying to figure out depending on what the Bills decide to do with him. So here's the full quote on Taran Johnson, and I want to get your initial reaction to this. Basically, how is the question was, how is the Taran Johnson fit in your defense? And Leonhard said, those are the great conversations we're having, and it is a position that schematically was different in what we did in Denver and what they do here the last couple of years with Taran Johnson. We know he's a great player, extremely productive, great leader. Finding a perfect role for a player like that is very high on our priority list. So there's, I think, a bit of rollover from the last regime in the sense that Brandon Beane was here. He has his finger on the pulse of how important Taran Johnson has been in the room. So I think that tells me that they want to try to make it work. But even wanting to try to make it work, there's still so many obstacles to making it work, Ryan, because if you look at his contract, this season alone here with Taran Johnson, and I have the wrong tab open, so let me bring this other one open. His cap hit this season in 2026 is going to be $11.4 million, 12.7 in 2027. He's got a void year for $2.7 million in 28 and a void year in 29 because of the restructure they already did on his contract. If they were to release him, it would come with a $9.5 million dead cap hit. So you'd be adding a little bit less than $2 million in cap space, but moving off of a player that maybe doesn't have a natural fit. What are your initial thoughts on the Taran Johnson conundrum?
I don't see a scenario where you want to move on from that contract because the cap savings just aren't good enough. But I agree with you completely. Where does he fit into this defense? How do you utilize him? And I know that Jim Leonhard said it's about, working with the talent that you currently have and making it work. I do worry, though, because this is a player in decline, as you mentioned. This is a player whose best days, in my opinion, are behind him. Injury issues, a lot there to work with, but you're not getting enough out of it to move on from him, whether it's pre-June 1st, post-June 1st. I just don't see the benefit for the Bills necessarily in moving on from him. But also the fit is so bizarre. And this is going to be another problem for this team is, which guys really fit what Jim Leonhard's ultimate vision is? Which guys are going to be trying to put a square into a round hole and hope for the best? That's going to be fascinating because obviously there are multiple players on this team where they were brought in to be in Sean McDermott's defense. And we could be talking about guys way down the roster on the depth chart, but also some of these starters like Taran Johnson. And I just don't see, though, with his current contract and how it works out, why the Bills would do it, unless it was more so out of respect to Johnson, where he realizes it's not a good fit and they want to let him go somewhere to play out the rest of his career.
A post-June 1st cut or trade would give the Bills a $9.5 million savings on their cap. So if you think about what the Bills traditionally like to do roster-wise, after June 1st, I mean, they're going to need space. I mean, usually we're getting to training camp and there's a reported restructure. I think Taran Johnson was maybe right around that time. So that's definitely part of the options as well, as maybe you kind of have him, keep him in during the entire off-season training program. Let him get a download with Jim Leonhard, which is exciting because Jim Leonhard has been known to come up with off-the-wall plans for players that maybe you don't think necessarily fit. I mean, one of the greatest examples might be one that he was talking about today, and George Wilson, who was a converted wide receiver. He played a big role even as a player, helping George Wilson assimilate to the defensive side of the ball and then learn the safety position. And so many times we've talked about Tre'Davious White, fans talking about it, wanting him to convert to safety. I don't think that that's necessarily possible because of his limitations as a tackler. Taran Johnson, on the other hand, that could be a conversation worth having. The issue is that the cap number that you want to use on a safety next to a developing player in Cole Bishop, when it's a little bit of an unknown? I almost think you'd want to spend that kind of money on a top-of-the-line free agent that is already coming in to play the specific position that Jim Leonhard needs in his defense. It's a really There's a lot of tough calls here. Let me read the end part of the quote.
Sure.
I love the player, Jim Leonhard said. I love the personality. We had a great conversation with him. He's excited for the change, not knowing what it is, though. He knows that we're going to communicate with him and find out what's right because he's been an extremely productive player in the NFL, and now it's trying to find out what the best match of some of the things that I've done in the past and what they did really well to feature a player like that in Leonhard's defense.
It's going to be fascinating because, again, you mentioned it. Can you make this work despite it not being a natural fit? Johnson is a willing tackler. He's a physical player, but that physicality has also taken a toll on him from the injury perspective. So how the Bills utilize him, what they want to do with him, you also have to consider how often he's been banged up as of late, the last few seasons. It'll be interesting, but then there's also guys like Jordan Hancock, a young player that is so versatile that I'm excited to see what he can do in a scheme like this. So that's what happens when you change your head coach and you bring in a new philosophy on the defensive side of the ball. There are going to be some players that I think really benefit from this change. And there's going to be a lot of question marks, Matt, where you and I are going to be watching closely this summer to see how they fit into Leonhard's vision for this defense.
All right, if you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel as well. It really helps us out. We appreciate you. I think we're on our way to 100 likes on this live episode. Let me see where we're at right now, actually. This is a good question. 26 likes. We got almost, we got a little.
That's not on the way to 100. Come on.
We gotta get up a little bit there, right?
Smash that like button.
Let's take a quick detour before we get to Cole Bishop, because I want to talk about him as well. And we'll have more coming to you over the next couple of days. I think we'll probably do one more podcast this week. I mentioned I wanted to get Chris Trapasso on next week, kind of talk about rewind to the Senior Bowl, talk about a couple of the players there. I've really started to dive into the wide receivers, so I think we're going to have a wide receivers episode coming up here in the next couple of days. I would imagine maybe I'll do that with Trapasso. Maybe I'll do that with you. I haven't decided yet. We'll figure it out on the fly because that's what we do here. So I posted, there was a clip yesterday. You put a story up about it, and it was current New Orleans Saints defensive end, Cam Jordan, was on, I think it was Get Up or First Take or one of those shows on ESPN. And he was talking about the Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen topic that seems to never, ever go away. And I did the thing that you never should do. I took the bait. I took the rage bait, and I quote tweeted it and just said he was making the argument that Josh Allen is who he's always believed he is because he can't win the big game, while kind of at the same time not even mentioning the fact that Lamar Jackson has barely been in any big games because he either loses early in the playoffs or doesn't make the playoffs completely, like this last season. And I just think that context is left out so much. Listen, Lamar is arguably the most accomplished regular season quarterback of the current active group, even more so than Patrick Mahomes. He's got more MVP awards, right? So if we're talking about regular season accomplishments, Lamar Jackson is in a tier of his own, but nobody really cares about the regular season. I want to talk about the playoffs and what you've done there. Right. And I just think Cam Jordan, like, I don't know, dude. I think he's probably just playing the game a little bit. But I also think in the back of my head, I think a lot of people actually believe this in the NFL because wasn't Josh Allen voted the most overrated player? I can't really wrap my mind around this. And it seems to be this perpetual conversation, despite the unparalleled statistical success of Josh Allen in the playoffs, the 4 turnover game notwithstanding.
Yeah, Lamar Jackson is who Cam Jordan says Josh Allen is. He said Superman in the regular season, but can't win the big game. And then he went on to, the second stupid comment he made on the show was that he was picking Lamar Jackson to be the next quarterback of that group, along with Joe Burrow and Allen, to win a Super Bowl. Talking about, oh, well, now you have Zay Flowers and you have, and he was going through this list. And by the way, he had everyone on that team this past season when they missed the playoffs altogether. it's infuriating because you look, Josh Allen over 100 QB rating in the playoffs. Lamar Jackson is an 84.6. I had it in the article. The touchdown interception ratio is nowhere close to the same stratosphere. Allen's out there averaging close to 30 points a game on offense, and his defense is letting up 33, where you have, I believe it's 5 playoff games for Lamar Jackson where he's thrown for less than 200 yards. It's baffling. It's mind-numbing that these players and soon-to-be former players, because Jordan's getting up there in age, make these comments. And you're right, we do take the bait, and shame on us, I guess. But then he doubled down on it on social media and said Super Bowl wins are a quarterback stat, because we all talk about that great Baltimore Ravens team that won it all with Trent Dilfer and Brad Johnson leading, the Buccaneers. Great defenses have won Super Bowls. If you look at the Patriots, they're in the Super Bowl because of their defense. Nothing to do with Drake May in the playoffs. May was great in the regular season. He's been atrocious in the playoffs. It's been carried by this defense. So you can't sit there and say it's a quarterback stat when there's multiple instances of defenses winning you Super Bowls in this league. But again, we should probably know better. And Cam Jordan definitely got the reaction that I'm sure he was hoping for when he went back on social media and commented by quote tweeting his commentary there on the ESPN show.
We'll put that to bed on that. Very well said.
Yeah.
So quickly here, a couple of things I want to get to before we get out of here. We have a date for the next Wingnut show. We're going to do that at the end of February on the heels of the NFL scouting combine. So it's Sunday, February 28th, Saturday, February 28th. That's right after the combine. We'll be back at Millersport, 1402 Millersport Highway. We're going to get it rocking and rolling in there. It's going to be a great time. We haven't been back to Millersport, I think, in like 3 months. So it's long overdue. We'll have some great wings. We'll talk some Bills combine thoughts. We'll really get into some of the prospects that stood out from the week. It's going to be a fun chat.
Yeah, it's always a good time. Late February, too. It's not just draft talk. Free agency starts to kick up a little bit in terms of who's really going to be available versus what guys are going to get locked up by their teams, franchise tagged by their teams. So we'll have plenty to talk about while we have some great wings and great beers.
This is a great super chat here from Dan Thompson over on YouTube. If the Bills make a big trade this offseason and you had to answer today, is it wide receiver or is it pass rusher? So there's a couple of names that immediately shoot to my brain because Max Crosby reportedly, according to Jake Glazer, he has played his last game with the Raiders. And Jeremy and Joe directly asked Brandon Beane, obviously tampering is a bit of a concern when you ask a question like this, but they danced around it. Like, would you take a swing like this on a player of Max Crosby's ability? And he's like, yeah, when we learn about things like this inside the scouting room, we're making calls on players. I mean, it's the Stephon Diggs story all over again. And I imagine a bunch of other players that we never even knew the Bills called on. So Max Crosby is big time pass rusher. There's probably one or two more that might get bantied about this offseason. Wide receiver, though, the Bills brought in a new wide receivers coach, and his last stop was the Arizona Cardinals, who have Marvin Harrison Jr., who might be a trade candidate as well. Both really juicy trades. Justin Jefferson is saying all the right things in Minnesota with Kay Adams at the Super Bowl. But again, he's another kind of outside target, maybe a Jordan Addison, maybe a Chris Olave. Where do you land?
100% on wide receiver. I'm going to take it a step further, and I'm going to probably get bashed for this. I'm out on Max Crosby if Jay Glazer is right in his reporting where he said the Raiders are going to get more for Max Crosby than what the Cowboys ended up getting. That's, multiple firsts, a player in return. I can't see the Bills doing that. 28-year-old pass rusher, so he's still in his prime. Don't get me wrong. I love Crosby's game. But the price versus what Micah Parsons ended up being traded for, I can't justify that. And I know the defense has been the biggest issue, but I think that a lot of what Jim Leonhard said today in terms of being aggressive, and you look at his blitz percentages, and that's at Wisconsin. It's a lot different at the college level than at the pros. But I think you can be aggressive and find ways to alter and affect the quarterback, maybe if you don't have a Crosby. But we know that this offense was still very productive, a top 10 unit, but imagine what it can be with a young number one wide receiver that you could maybe get via trade. I just think that it's a lot harder to get those difference makers at wide receiver, especially where the Bills have been drafting, where sometimes you do end up getting a hit on an edge rusher later in round one, sometimes on day two. Not that the Bills are necessarily going to be able to do it that way, but I'd rather let Leonhard maybe go with a young guy in day two of this draft and push your chips in trying to get a game changer at wide receiver one.
So I'm totally with you, specifically because of the defensive coordinator and thinking about the kind of fit in his defense. And I'm not saying that Max Crosby wouldn't be a fit. As a matter of fact,
Right.
that he'd be a terror in a Jim Leonhard defense. The problem, or the upside of going with a Jim Leonhard, though, is his unparalleled reach into the college game. And I think that you want to lean on that when you're building out this defense. He's got so many connections there. I think he has the ability to really help scout some of these players that are going to fit into his defense. And if you think about the guys that were on the edge that play the Max Crosby role in Denver these last couple of years, you're talking about a 7th round draft pick in Jonathan Cooper and a 2nd round draft pick in Nick Menino, who went late in the 2nd round at the 64th pick. These guys are available out there. And, the Bills took a swing last year on a TJ Sanders. They traded up for him. This is a very deep edge class. And I think if you come out of this class with 2 edge rushers that you're really excited about, that Jim Leonhard has a big say in how you acquire those players, now you're sitting here saying, hey, maybe you have the kind of luck you did last year when you got aggressive in Sanders and then you end up double dipping with Deion Walker and he ends up being the guy that really popped for you. I think that's a much better way to go about it. And then also make the trade for the wide receiver, because I think you're going to want to go for a wide receiver in this draft too. Maybe it's wide receiver in the 1st round. Maybe it's a big free agent addition or trade for a wide receiver. And then you get 2 edge rushers later in the draft. You grab a linebacker or 2. It's a deep linebacker draft. There's so many ways to fill the holes that I think currently exist for the Bills that I think the path and the cost to a wide receiver, I just think that's more palpable as we sit here today.
I agree completely with that. But if there is one good thing for the Bills, you're right. It's looking at this draft class and how deep it is at receiver, linebacker, edge, safety. Some of the needs that the Bills have going into the offseason, especially on the defense side of the ball with this shift. And then there's some really good linebackers that are going to be free agents. Some that Jim Leonhard had in Denver, some that he coached at Wisconsin. So I think between free agency and the draft, you can hit on a lot of your needs, especially on the defensive side of the ball. If you're going to push in your chips and make an aggressive move via trade, bring in a wide receiver, maybe add another one in the middle rounds of this draft where it's such a deep draft class. Find someone that you think is going to fit the mold of what you want to do, and then go into next season and see where everything falls.
Some really high praise. And I think one of the most exciting things to come out of today's press conference from Jim Leonhard was what he was talking about with Cole Bishop. And listen, he said Christian Benford, because I asked him about Patrick Surtain in that defense and what that meant for his defense out there, along with Vance Joseph, having a shutdown corner. And he said, listen, Christian Benford has traveled, especially recently. We think that that's something we could try to do with him here. And he's one of those pillar players that you build your defense around. So that was one piece that I think you get excited about. The other piece is knowing that Cole Bishop is the position that Jim Leonhard played in this league. And here's his direct quote. I was a very big fan of Cole coming out of college. The versatility that he has, he's kind of a jack of all trades. Physical, can play in space, can cover. He's kind of the type of safety I tried to be myself. I definitely gravitated towards his game when he was getting out of college. There were certain things he didn't do as well at the college level that I felt like there was going to be a little bit of a process for him to really flourish in the NFL. It was kind of awesome to see him go from year 1 to year 2, and you're starting to see those flashes show up more and more as I expected through the evaluation process. Now it's just trying to find opportunities for him to continue to grow. And Listen, I think a lot of fans had reservation about Cole's upside in McDermott's defense because it felt like if you go back at the college level, that first thing that Leonhard mentioned was his physicality, right? At times, they asked him to play more of the deep safety role, which is something that listening to Nate Tice on the Athletic Football Show this season, he was always flummoxed by that because he saw his tape at Utah and thought this guy's going to be a bit of a thumper in the box as a safety, and they kind of asked him to play the Micah Hyde role. What do you think the plan will be for Bishop, and how good of a match do you feel like this is going to be?
This is going to be one of Jim Leonhard's cornerstone players on this defense, where I was talking earlier about players that really fit this scheme and what he wants to be able to do. I think Bishop is going to be a smooth transition to this new defense. I think Christian Benford is going to be a smooth transition to this defense. I have high hopes for even Greg Rousseau, who I've been a little bit down on at times. So there are guys in this system that are currently on this team that I think are going to be even better in Jim Leonhard's system. And Bishop would probably be number one on my list in terms of the current personnel. The way that you can move him around, the jack of all trades comment leads me to believe that you're going to get creative with Cole Bishop and how you can utilize him. And you want to play him close to the line. Let him be a thumper. Let him make plays. Let him be one of those players that makes the quarterback uncomfortable. So I really think you're going to see his role grow here in Buffalo in his first year under Jim Leonhard. And I think he's ready for it. You saw the maturation process from year one to year two. A light bulb almost going off this season after a few games and it turning into him making a play almost every single game, it felt like. Now he's going to be in a system where he's allowed to be more aggressive, allowed to be more physical. And you're going to see a lot of those traits that made him so appealing in that draft class come out and come to show. So I'm very excited for Cole Bishop and what this means for him in this new scheme.
It is 7:20. The Sabres game has already started. We're almost wrapping up here so everybody can get to their TV. The last time you can watch the Sabres for 2 weeks as they break up for the Olympic break. We're also brought to you by Amtrak. And right now, they have an auto train flash sale going on. Let Amtrak do the long distance driving for you. Avoid traffic, rough conditions, and are we there yet with Auto Train flash sale. For a limited time, you can book fares starting as low as $39 plus the cost of your vehicle to take the scenic route up or down I-95. Will safely transport you and your vehicle between Sanford, Florida, near Orlando, and Lorford, Virginia, near Washington, D.C. And if it's a family trip, kids ages 2 to 12 ride for 50% off. If you want more details on this, head over to Amtrak.com. They always got you covered for all of your travel needs. Last thing before we get out of here, final thought, Ryan Talbot.
Yeah, final thought. Obviously, some coaching moves still need to be made on this roster. Stick with us. We'll have you covered there. We'll have you another live show coming up talking about some Senior Bowl prospects and prospects to watch. We'll have you covered also on the site, Syracuse.com and NYUp.com.
Have a great night, everybody. Take care.